Welcome, everybody. We are going to just take a few minutes here as everyone joins, seeing the participant list grow, which is awesome to see. Welcome. I'm Kurt Triplett. I'm the city manager for the city of Kirkland, and we will do some introductions in just a second. All right. Got a couple more minutes here just to make sure everyone gets a chance to get on before we launch. Again, I'm Kurt Triplett, the city manager for the city of Kirkland. Very excited to have you tonight. Thank you for joining us. Okay. All right, I am thinking it seems to have stabilized. So it's 6:02. So to make sure that we are respectful of your time, I'm just going to say a few words, and then I'm going to turn this over to Allison Zeich, our senior planner from the planning department. So welcome again for all of you. I'm Kurt Tripp. I'm the city manager. I want to acknowledge that several of our council members are watching tonight. Councilmember Amy Falcone, Councilmember Neil Black, Councilmember John Pascal, and Councilmember Kelly Curtis have all joined, and others may join as well. But I want to emphasize that tonight is all about you. We want to make sure that we hear questions and concerns from the community. So although the council will be watching, they are not part of this other than to hear your questions and so forth. We will have ample opportunity to speak to the council at future council meetings coming up, and you're always welcome to email us directly and to the council as well. But tonight's really about allowing you to ask your questions of our panel of experts. So what we're going to do tonight is we have a brief overview, and then really anything that you want to ask about the fiscal impact study and the community benefits is what we're here to do today, and any concerns that you want to share with us. So with that as a high-level overview, I just want to acknowledge we have assembled as many folks as we could to answer any questions you might have, and they'll all be introduced soon. So you have the leadership team from the city, as well as council members. We also have all of the consultant experts who have put this report together, and they're going to give you a quick overview, but the majority of this time is going to be dedicated to your questions and answers. So with that, I should also say that the folks have been asked to keep their cameras off, but we will turn them on if we're answering a question directly. So after I turn this over, I'll be turning my video off, but I may come back again. And our deputy city manager, Tracy Dunlop, will keep hers on, and Allison Zeich, our senior planner, will keep hers on as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Allison, and she can go over some of the logistics. But we're very, very excited to have you all here. This is obviously something very critical to the entire city, and we really appreciate that you took the time tonight to spend time with us. We look forward to answering your questions. So thank you very much. Allison.
Thank you, Kurt, and thank you again to everyone here tonight. Thank you for sharing part of your evening with us. We can go ahead and go to the next slide, and I'll share our agenda for the evening. So right now we're here welcoming you. Thank you so much for coming. And then I'm going to go over the format for the evening, and after that we're going to kick it over to our consultant team from Methuen and Burke to go through a short presentation. That's going to be about 10 or 15 minutes just to give you a little bit of an overview before we start taking questions. As Kurt mentioned, we do have some opportunities coming up in the near future to engage with our city council directly on this at council meetings. So we'll be talking to city council about this project again on November 16th and again on December 14th. We can go ahead and go to the next slide, please, Aaron.
I'd also like to acknowledge that Mayor Penny Sweet has also joined the call, so she'll be watching as well. So welcome, Mayor Sweet.
Thank you, and welcome, Mayor Sweet. So there's two different ways that we can take questions tonight. We're going to accept questions virtually or through the Q&A chat. Based on how many people we have wishing to speak or ask questions tonight, we may limit the time for verbal questions to allow us to get to as many questions as possible. So you'll have the option of raising your hand to speak to the team directly or typing those questions into the Q&A box, and we'll alternate between answering verbal questions and written questions. If time doesn't allow us to get to all questions, we are going to be following up written questions with a Q&A document that we'll publish on our website. And last note is that this meeting is being recorded, and the video will be posted to our project website when it's available. So if you know anyone that wasn't able to join us tonight, there will be an opportunity for them to watch the recording. We can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So I wanted to take a moment just to introduce the team that we've assembled here tonight to answer questions. You've already met Kurt Triplett, our city manager. We also have Tracy Dunlop, our deputy city manager, who's been helping us with the community benefits and fiscal impacts analysis. Our director of planning and building, Adam Weinstein, is here. Jeremy McMahon, our deputy director of planning and building, is here. That's me, Allison Zeich. I'm the project planner for the station area plan. From our finance department, we have George Dugdale and Kevin Pelstring here. They played a role in the fiscal impacts and community benefits analysis. And we also have Joel Funt, our transportation manager, here to answer questions. We also have members of our consultant team, and that is Aaron Ishizaki and Brad Barnett from Methuen, and Brian Murphy and Kristen Mate from Burke. So you'll be hearing from them during the presentation, and then all of us are available to answer questions as they come up. And before I turn it over to Aaron and the rest of the consultant team for that brief presentation, we're going to go ahead and ask those interested in speaking tonight to please raise your hand in Zoom if you wish to ask a question. For those on computers or smartphones, you can click on the participants or more button and click raise hand, or the raise hand button should also be at the bottom of your Zoom window. For those calling in on a phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. While we're listening to the presentation, we'll be working on compiling the speaker list in the order that we've seen hands raised, and we'll call on you after the presentation when we start Q&A. We'll call on you when it is your turn to ask a question. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and ask Aaron and the consultant team, Brad, Brian, and Kristen, to go ahead and give us that brief presentation. Thank you.
Hey, Allison, while that's being set up, I want to highlight that Angela Rosman and Katja Allen from the Planning Commission have also joined us and will be watching tonight. So welcome.
Wonderful. Well, welcome. And again, thanks everyone so much for joining us this evening. My name is Erin Ishizaki, and I'm a partner with Methuen, and we're really honored to be the consultant team working together with the city staff on the station area plan for Northeast 85th and 405. And we're really happy to be here with you this evening to share an overview of the project as well as the recent study that was completed. So just a little background on the station area planning project itself. Over history, you know, the station area located at Northeast 85th and 405, sort of centered there, that place has really always been a crossroads over many, many years. And, you know, I want to also acknowledge, of course, that it's as well the traditional land of the first people of Kirkland, the Duwamish people, both past and present. And I really want to honor with gratitude the land itself and the people of the Duwamish tribe. And, you know, as time has gone on, it's been a crossroads as a place of one of the first grocery stores on the east side, as well as, you know, today, lots of major efforts there, including Costco, Kirkland, Northeast 85th being one of the very first highways on the east side as well. And so it's always been this kind of hub over time. And what prompted this station area plan project is the planned WashDOT and Sound Transit bus rapid transit station that will be located at that interchange location, which is pretty remarkable. It will connect Kirkland regionally to the light rail at Bellevue, Linwood, and to SeaTac, and it'll be frequent bus service every 10 to 15 minutes. So you can see on the right hand of the slide here what that orange line showing that bus rapid transit connecting with the yellow light rail. We did a market study earlier in the project, which was looking out for the next 10 to 15 years, and found that the station area has really good potential for both residential development as well as a strong location advantage for office, shops, services, for affordable housing and new jobs. So this is a summary of the planning process. Council requested this planning effort to begin back in 2018 or 2019. So we've been at it for a while and started in earnest in spring of 2020 with our first stage, which was the vision and concept stage. You can see along the top here, in addition to all of the outreach and engagement that we've done throughout the station area planning process, we also based that early vision and initial concepts on a lot of the plans that have been done previously, including the neighborhood plans that are relevant to this area, as well as the comprehensive plan. And so as a team, we've really thought about all of the vision and goals that's been developed through engagement in those processes and carrying those forward through the station area plan. So along the top here, you can see highlighted the different types of engagement that has happened throughout the course of the project. After that initial vision and concepts, we moved into developing some draft alternatives. So 3 draft alternatives were developed for study with an environmental impact statement process, and a draft EIS was published in winter. At that point, you can see these sort of circles and the little detour here. Council was interested in further evaluating these alternatives. And so we've just wrapped up this fiscal impacts and community benefit study, which we'll share more with you about this evening. And as you can see, that's adjusted the overall planning schedule, and we have much more engagement and outreach planned for next year. So again, the vision for the station area that council laid out was really this idea of compact, transit-oriented growth that's really around this new regional BRT station, bus rapid transit station, as well as the trail connections that already exist with the Cross Kirkland corridor. And they see this as a chance to grow smart, to increase access to opportunity, and to benefit both the station area and ideally Kirkland as a whole. So the city laid out an objective to leverage this BRT station investment and to maximize transit-oriented development in a way that would do 4 things: create the most opportunity and inclusion, the most value for the city, the most community benefits, including affordable housing, and the most quality of life. And so these were the objectives that were set as the project started out last year. Since then, as I mentioned, we've had lots of great engagement and outreach on the project. This is just a summary of the comments and the engagement that happened along with those draft alternatives last year. And it was really remarkable. We heard from over 600 people of all different ages who live and work here in Kirkland and in the station area. And you can see some examples here of the different things we did, from working with students at Lake Washington High School to doing an online open house and survey, to doing some meetings in a box and working with the Chinese information services. So we really appreciate everybody's time and input into this process, envisioning the future of the station area. This is a word cloud from some of those comments and some of the key topics that we heard about as those draft alternatives, looking at a range of different growth scenarios, were shared at the end of last year. And you can see along the right here some of the sample comments that we also heard from the comments that were received. And some of the words here are indicative of some key themes and questions that we heard about. And based on this, council really, as I said, wanted to evaluate the draft alternatives further, especially around the topics of affordability of needed services and infrastructure, and potential for public benefit. And it's interesting, it's sort of interesting because what we heard on one hand is that while mobility, infrastructure, and inclusion might be some of the greatest challenges that people were concerned about, at the same time, they're also some of the greatest opportunities for this vision and this plan that's looking out for the next 20+ years within the station area. And so the city council took action by doing 2 things. The first is requesting the supplemental study of benefits and impacts that we'll speak about this evening. And the second one is the draft EIS alternatives had looked at a wide range of potential growth within the station area. And they heard pretty clearly that what was called draft EIS alternative 3, the top end of potential growth over 23 years, they heard pretty consistently that there was
Hey, Erin, sorry to interrupt, but I think your audio cut out for about the last 30 seconds or so.
Can you hear my audio now?
Yes.
Great. Okay, thanks. Apologies. So the last piece, as I mentioned, was that the second action that council took was to lower the intensity and take that third EIS alternative off the table. So these questions are the focus of the supplemental study that was requested. And so the focus was if the city were to implement this vision that we just heard about within the station area as a thriving new walkable center with new jobs, affordable housing, sustainable buildings, shops and restaurants all linked with transit. Kind of two parts to the study. The first is fiscal impact. So the main question there was, can the city afford the investments necessary to address the increased demand on infrastructure and services that come with growth? And then the second part of the study was the community benefits part. These questions, study questions, were number one, how can public receive the benefits of growth? And number two, how can development advance the city's priority objectives? So that it was our charge over the last several months as we worked on this study. I'll give you the high level results of the study, and then we'll walk you a bit through some more of the details. So on this broad question, is the vision feasible? During the process of this study, the team created two alternatives for study called, one looked at what is based on current trends within the development market today, which is close to one of the EIS alternatives. The second that was looked at was based around more of a transit connected growth idea, which is called alternative B. So in this question, is it feasible? What the study found is that this current trends pattern of growth, under that, the city must make significant capital investments in order to support that growth. And it just, the current trends of development do not generate much financial contribution to required infrastructure. And this is a pattern that's similar to other places around Kirkland, as well as other sort of suburban communities. It's not uncommon or unexpected, I wouldn't say. The second alternative that was studied, transit connected growth, the study found that that is feasible to serve, but it would require the city to recognize that a variety of strategies will be needed to do a couple things, both balance the city's overall budget as well together with the station area needs. So that was kind of the high level findings, and we're going to walk you through a bit more of the study. So as I mentioned, this study has two pieces, the fiscal impacts and then community benefits. And this describes a bit about the process of the study. The first thing we did as a team was to develop what we're calling the June alternatives to study. And so this narrowed the growth bookends that was studied in the EIS and also balanced out the type and mix of allowed development that would be portrayed within that 23-year timeframe. There were also a series of technical infrastructure studies that were done to understand what the minimum sort of representative infrastructure projects would be needed to support those two alternatives. Once we had that, there were two pieces, the fiscal impacts analysis to test if we can support those needs, and then a community benefits analysis to maximize things like affordable housing, access to opportunity, better ways to walk and bike, ways to support parks, schools, and environmental benefits. And then that all came together in a set of recommended strategies, including public infrastructure strategies and community benefit strategies. And through this study, again, these are sort of preliminary tools that we're looking to help address infrastructure funding gaps and also to support growth and quality of life for this next 23 years of the planning horizon. And we're really through the study, again, trying to link back to those objectives that we just talked about earlier that the city established for the project. Value for the city, quality of life, opportunity, inclusion, and community benefits. And begin to look at how investment can help support both needs for today and today's residents in the area, as well as catalyze this future transit connected development to sort of boost the potential for value capture for community benefits. So I think from here, we'll have Brian from Burke describe a bit more around the assumptions and the basis of the study.
I'm Kristen Mate. I'm also from Burke, and I'm going to kick this off and then pass it off to Brian. So I'm here to talk to you about the results of the fiscal impact analysis, as well as the June alternatives that fed that analysis. Next slide. So in June, Methuen worked with the City Council to narrow the bookends to study as part of this work. And these bookends were used to establish the build-out estimates in the station area for the next 23 years. June Alternative A on the left side of this slide has minimal changes to the existing policies and zoning and will really continue the current trends being seen in the station area already. It adjusts growth upwards from the no action alternative that was in the draft SEIS, just to account for recent development trends, which are already exceeding some of the planning projections. June Alt B, which is on the right, this was created more to reflect the transit connected growth that could happen in the station area. And this alternative is based on the draft SEIS Alt 2, but has slightly lower growth assumptions and redistributes some of the growth that was previously in the northeast quadrant down to the southeast quadrant to help mitigate some infrastructure constraints. I also just wanted to point out that this alternative also takes into account transitions between commercial areas towards low density residential areas. Next slide. So based on those alternatives that we just saw, we were able to kind of estimate how many households and employment would come with that type of growth. So on this table, you can see on the top line, the number of households that were assumed, both in the draft SEIS, which are in the darker blue columns, as well as now in the June alternatives, which are in the teal columns. So households are on the top and employment is on the bottom. And the thing here is that alternative A is slightly higher than the no action to account for those current growth trends. And June alternative B is slightly lower than the DSEIS alternative 2. Also, these numbers are the total growth that's anticipated, total growth and existing jobs and households that are anticipated to be in the station area at the end of our study period, which was a 23-year study period. So this is what it might look like in 2044. Next slide. So the fiscal model also considered the future, it was looking at the future build out of the station area as well as the needed infrastructure improvements that would be required to serve this future build out. And we looked at that to kind of understand what costs might be associated with these alternatives. So this slide shows some of the representative infrastructure that was identified through some other specific studies on this and what would be needed to support growth in either alternative. So on the left is the June Alt-A alternative, and you can see that there's still significant capital improvements and demands that will be need to be met under the June Alternative A. And under June Alternative B, there's still some of that significant capital improvement and some more intense improvements needed in that area outlined in red. And there's also a little bit of efficiency gained here by being able to concentrate some of that growth in this area where there's some larger improvements that could be made in a more efficient manner than if it was spread out throughout the city. The only other thing I would note here is that down at the bottom of this slide, you can see what the estimates were for what the capital would cost under both alternatives. And this includes the total cost of the infrastructure investment, as well as the revenues, the dedicated revenues that would have been available to pay for these. So in Alt A, there's about 164 million of capital shortfalls, so a deficit. And in Alt B, there's about $118 million deficit. And it's slightly smaller in Alt B, even though there's more infrastructure improvements, because there's also more dedicated revenues available from the growth anticipated in that alternative, as well as some development funded improvements. Next slide. So in the fiscal impact analysis, Erin mentioned, we were looking to answer, can the station area afford the investment necessary to address increased demand on infrastructure and public services? And what we found, and what's shown in this table here, is that for general government operating, both alternatives, either alternative, there's enough general government operating revenue that would be generated in either alternative to cover the costs that are anticipated under either alternative. And that's kind of shown on the top line of that table. In the middle line, you can see what the capital surplus or deficit would be. And that's kind of what we just previewed on the previous slide. But here you can see there are significant capital needs under both alternatives, and that the city is going to have capital shortfalls under either alternative unless other strategies are implemented. And also, like I mentioned before, there are some more revenues available to help pay for the infrastructure needed under Alternative B. But overall, one more note, just overall, when you look at both general government operating costs and revenues, as well as capital costs and revenues, the total surplus deficit for both, there's a smaller deficit for Alternative B than for Alternative A. And it's significantly smaller with that 35 million under Alt B versus the 137 million under Alt A. And now Brian will pick up.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Murphy, also with Burke, and I'll summarize our findings and recommendations to Council. So as Kristen just described, the vision that is established for the station area plan is, we think, a feasible vision. It brings in that close-in transit opportunities for residents and employees to get around the region. It brings substantial additional housing and employment close into the city of Kirkland. And moreover, it is more feasible than the investments required under Alt-A or the current trends, because it brings significant opportunity for development funded infrastructure to help address some of those needs. So we did some additional sensitivity analysis to look at where those contributions were coming from. And a few points are called out here on the slide to just summarize. Much of the development on the eastern side of 405 is necessary to help fund the infrastructure investments that are needed on the west side of 405, and specifically those multimodal investments around the BRT station. It's also important to have the commercial growth, which will help fund some of those infrastructure investments, and that commercial growth brings substantial opportunities for value capture, which means that there's opportunities for the public sector to incentivize or to even require public investment by the development that helps provide community benefits. And I'll speak to a few of those on the following slides. So City Council asked us in particular to look at parks, affordable housing, mobility, sustainability, and schools, and how they would be affected by the station area plan. So there is a need to provide additional investment in parks, but as Kristen noted, there's a surplus, operating surplus under both alternatives, and that could somewhat be used to some degree to offset those needs within the park system. Other ideas may include looking at setting a more urban focused levels of service for parks delivery within, as Kirkland becomes more urbanized and more dense. That may be considered under the parks plan for the whole of the community. And then for larger parks and smaller parks, there are a variety of strategies, including a potential tax increment financing strategy or other requirements of development or ways to incentivize development to contribute to smaller scale parks, linear parks and the like. Similarly, on affordable housing, there may be a way to bring a program called the Commercial Linkage Program, which requires commercial development to contribute to affordable housing. So as those jobs come, they make an investment in close-in housing to support those employees and others. And some of that linkage fee could be distributed to workforce development as well. Mobility or transportation is another place that TIF, that tax increment financing strategy, could be used to finance infrastructure. And again, development requirements or bonuses could be directed to mobility improvements. On the next slide, we see the same kind of strategies for sustainability. And also there's an opportunity here for partnerships with the private sector. And then schools, which are a great concern, and Lake Washington School District capacity could be met through development requirements or bonuses, and also through finding spaces within private development or possibly within public spaces as well to support additional school space and childcare space.
Great, thanks so much, Brian. So just the final piece is that we wanted to summarize what we heard, what the team heard from council at the study session last week, which was the council indicated they would like for the staff and consulting team to focus on drafting a preferred plan based on June Alternative B and to continue developing some of the solutions that were proposed both for infrastructure and community benefit strategies. And just as a quick piece, the next steps in station area planning, this gives you kind of the outlook on what's happening over the next month. We'll be working on developing that preferred plan direction as directed by council, aiming for publication of a final EIS at the end of the year, and then moving into developing the draft and final plan in 2022. This is a summary of what that preferred plan direction will include. I'm happy to get to this. If there's questions and answers, we can give you some more information on that, but generally it will be sort of a vision and the beginning framework of implementation for the station area. So I think we're ready to move into our Q&A session and focus time on discussion. Just a reminder, as a project team, we always come back to the statement from the City of Kirkland's comp plan. Civic engagement, innovation, and diversity are highly valued, and we're respectful, fair, and inclusive, which is a good mantra as we get started with discussion. A few ground rules. Please be respectful of the views of others. Be ready to expand on your view so that it can be best understood. And just a reminder that hate speech is not tolerated. Our Q&A session will end at 7:50, so we have plenty of time. And as a reminder, again, how to ask a question, the information is right here.
Great, thanks so much, Erin. So we already have about 10 people that have raised their hands. We also have a good list of questions that people have entered in the chat. So like I mentioned before, we're going to try to kind of hop back and forth between some verbal questions and some written questions. We just ask that since we do have a good list already, that you try to get to your question, and we have a lot of ways for you to get comments to us, so we're excited to hear from you. And with that, let's get the first question going from Scott Becker. Shay, can we please unmute Scott Becker?
Good evening, can you hear me?
Yes, thanks, Scott.
Good. My name is Scott Becker, and I've lived in Kirkland since about 1999. I've worked in banking for over 35 years, 18 or so of which in and around Kirkland. I'm a member of and have been president of both the Rotary Club of Kirkland and the Kirkland Chamber of Commerce. Also I've been a part of many other boards in the community. I'm speaking in support of the City Council Station Area Plan alternative that allows the city to grow in a smart, affordable way, and that will take advantage of the new public transit bus center that is coming to Kirkland. As we all know, our region continues to grow with the need for new jobs and housing constantly on the horizon. We can't pretend that the growth isn't happening, although many would like to. We just can't keep things the way they are while the rest of the region, including Bellevue and Redmond, continue to grow. Instead, we need to grow in a smart way while preserving the character of our great city. If we're going to have to have a major transit station in our city, we need to put jobs close to it. We need to put housing close to it. And we need to make sure that people can travel to the station and away from it on an easy basis. The way to achieve this is to maximize the commercial development as close to the transit station as possible. We all know that the commercial development pays for residential development, for public services, and it pays for and helps shape the smart transportation decisions for our schools, police, fire, safety. And it will also help fund new infrastructure, biking and pedestrian connections, affordable housing, parks, and community benefits. We're all aware of the fact that one of our major employers in the city is considering more development, which leads to more jobs. We have a company in Google that has already invested heavily in our city and has done it in a smart, integrated way. Their offices on 6th Street and at Kirkland Urban fit with our city. But it doesn't matter whether it's Google or another large employer or several employers. We need to make sure that we have good jobs for our citizens while paying for the services that we need. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. It looks like our next question is from Kurt Fleck. Can we please unmute Kurt Fleck? Kurt, I think you're still muted. If you can unmute yourself, we'd love to hear your question.
There.
Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thanks.
I'm representing Overlook Village, a condominium or HOA community in the right off of 80th between Lee Johnson Chevrolet and the high school, and bordered on one side by the church and then on another side by another condominium unit. We're just wondering about the extended height in our area. Would that it looks like it's proposed at anywhere between 60 and 85 feet tall. So would that mean that another a high density like an apartment building or a condominium building would be proposed for that area? And what is the time frame for this build out that far? Because I know closer towards 85th it's going to be built out, but we have 11 freestanding houses, and so there's quite a few people that are affected. So just curious.
Hi, Kurt. This is Erin. Thanks so much for your question. One thing I wanted to just share generally with the planning process, where we are looking at what would be allowed development within the by the end of that 23-year planning time. So just to make sure everyone is aware, we're not talking about a specific development project. The other thing is, I appreciate your question regarding some of the transition areas within the station area. And I would like to ask my colleague Brad if he could maybe speak a bit to how that will be approached as we move forward with developing the preferred plan.
Sure. Good evening. Thank you for the question. We're looking at a range of different strategies for how you would transition from one allowed height zone to existing heights as well. And so we're looking at a number of different strategies. Those would include things like landscape or vegetated buffers to create screening away from higher density uses or taller heights. Also looking at step backs or setbacks that would require buildings to be set apart away from existing development to minimize the amount of shadow or other intrusions onto the property, visually speaking. And then also looking at the access requirements onto those parcels to make sure that we're not overloading the traffic circulation for adjacent development. So we're looking at a range of different strategies, in addition to considering different heights as well that would be allowed. And as my colleague Aaron said, the allowance of a height doesn't guarantee that it would get built out to that height as well. So many developments that are allowed to build to a certain height won't build to that height for market reasons or site constraints or other factors as well. So those are some of the considerations we're looking at as we consider those different strategies for transitioning from new development to existing development today.
Thanks, Brad. I'm going to hop in and read a question that we received through the chat. This question is saying that they live in the Kirkland Highlands neighborhood and have read the documents, but it's a little difficult to understand exactly what changes are being studied in the Highlands neighborhood. And that kind of goes along with the next question, which is also in the initial concepts images from the plan, what does incremental infill represent?
Great, thank you for the questions. So I'll just kind of share a bit briefly, and then I would again love to have Brad fill us in with some more detail on this one here. So the Kirkland Highlands neighborhood is, as folks might be aware, this will be the location where the access to the Sound Transit WSDOT planned pickup drop-off spot will be for the bus rapid transit station right up by the interchange there. So part of our charge with the station area plan is to think about how we know we can't have direct influence, over Sound Transit and WSDOT's project, but our goal is really to make the best connections to that bus rapid transit station we can, and think about ways to transition to that new use. And so the Highlands is a place where there will be that access point to the station. And so that is a consideration as we look at that area. The other piece is looking at the potential for ways to connect between that station down to Old Downtown. So those are some of the general things that the station area plan is looking at in that zone. I'm wondering, Brad, if you would mind describing a little bit more about what incremental infill means, and as we move forward to that preferred plan development, what we'll be looking at in that area.
Sure. So incremental infill throughout the study area, not just in the Highlands, but throughout the study area, refers to smaller scale infill development. So that would be development types like duplexes or triplexes or row houses, townhouses, those sorts of smaller. We called it incremental infill because they tend to develop on smaller lots over an extended period of time, as opposed to larger multifamily or commercial developments. And so that's the intent of that concept in some of the initial growth frameworks that have made their way through the process. From a zoning standpoint, many of those are already allowed throughout the study area through the missing middle legislation that the city passed. And what we've been looking at for the Highlands in particular is a small area closest to the interchange, allowing potentially for some of that incremental infill up to a slight increase in height. We studied it up to 45 feet in some small areas closest to the interchange. We're still working through what the final area would look like for that. But the growth numbers that we showed in alternative B were consistent with that idea of smaller scale, as we called it, incremental infill in that area south of 87th to 85th in close to the interchange itself.
Thanks, Brad. We're going to hop to the next question, and Colleen Clement is up next.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Perfect. Simple unmute. That worked great. So hi, my name is Colleen Clement, and I'm actually a member of both the People for Climate Action of Kirkland, and I am also on the Kirkland's Environmental Technical Advisory Group and worked on the Sustainability Master Plan. I want to thank you to have another opportunity to address a question on the 85th Street Station area, particularly pertaining to cost and benefit analysis. I was very glad to see there was an emphasis on sustainability. This report actually reflected a lot of good research, especially in the areas of transportation and water and sewage and stormwater. But where we found a gap was that in the area of buildings, it seemed to us that it did not really drill down as deeply on the impact that buildings would have, especially on greenhouse gas emissions. And it didn't discuss any of the mitigations. Under the Sustainability Master Plan, there is a section ES 1.1, which basically says that the city needs to factor emission reduction into budget processes and decision-making. So we felt that that was a key critical consideration that should be reflected in the study. And so we felt there was a lack of that. And so in alignment with that SMP and the decision-making, we felt that the study should contain an analysis of the impacts and associated mitigations such as electrification, energy efficiency, and those sorts of things for the various building scenarios so that it can be another decision point when making decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person we have on our list is Roshan Parikh.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll just start out by saying that, I think that really the quality of life in Kirkland is really at stake with this because it's so big and impacting the whole city. And I think good stewardship really requires that we think about limited resources in terms of our open space, our traffic mobility, our parks, and our fiscal resources. So I was very glad to hear at the study session. I especially like the comments from council members Pascal, Curtis, and Black about what it would take to really make this a success. And the vision of it, retail and housing and affordable housing, all the laundry list of things is great. When you see what the actual factors are and how they're being analyzed, I have a lot of question about how that could actually be effectuated, especially when I hear terms like the growth will pay for itself and that bigger will be better, that consultants and staff found economies of scale in policing and fire rather than the traditional population allocation method. That raises a lot of questions for me that I would appreciate a response about. And just to finish up, with regard to just the traffic, and I was really glad to hear several of the council members wanting to go out, walk the area, understand what it's really like. If you put in 6,000 regular Google employees plus another 1,000 support staff, and you figure out what the parking requirement is for that and the daily number of trips, and you combine that with what happens daily at Lake Washington High School, for instance, in terms of pickup and drop off, and you look at the letter that was sent back in February from the school district to the city, it all comes down to phasing and financing. It should not be done in a way that creates a gridlock for everybody. It'd be like throwing a big boulder in the pond and the waves are going to ripple out. So first concern is mobility and traffic. The scale of development, 250 feet potentially for Google. Councilmember Curtis, I thought, was particularly articulate about what it means to have a park. And it's great to have little squares or maybe some linear parks, but what we really need is also provision for a community park. If the level of service for parks in Kirkland is going to diminish, this is one of our major quality of life issues, and I would even argue part of our public health mission as a city, to have those kind of facilities. If that's going to diminish in some material way, that needs to be in some way quantified and described so that the rest of us who are interested in this can really have a chance to, delve into it and talk to people and come up with creative solutions. Because the way I see it right now is it's being kind of assumed away or reasoned away. And I just think that would be a disservice. And I was so glad to hear, especially those three council members talk about really looking into how the details of it will work, especially with the traffic, to have collector distributors to get to the bus rapid transit. I've also been informed that there is a proposal to have a planned area ordinance in favor of one concentrated economic interest. I do not believe that it is good stewardship to let someone front run the entire planning process. And I feel that if that were allowed, others would use that as an example to gain something for themselves. So please go consistently. Don't give any special favor to anybody else, no matter how great they might be for our community who has a tremendous economic interest. Think through that. We've hardly had a chance to look at the fiscal studies. I mean, the whole thing was really, thank you to the consultants and to the staff for working on it. I know you put a lot of thought and energy into it, but we on the outside, we need a chance to work through it and talk to people about it. So I would appreciate an opportunity to do that. And finally, on the public safety aspect of this, it's just hard for me to believe that we would require less per capita of resources when you've got so many more together. Almost everywhere you look, where you have higher density, requires higher levels of service from fire and police. And so when I see that there is an assumption that brought that way down in the Plan B versus the Plan A, I immediately tried to find the answer, and I have not. If someone on the call could give me that answer, I certainly would be happy. And I'll leave you with this. There should be no rush to approve. Okay, how long did it take us to get through Kirkland Urban and Totem Lake and every other significant big development in the city? Give it the time. Take what it takes to have consultants and community involvement to get there. Don't rush into Plan B just because it seems like a fair way to go today. It's going to last a long, long time. This will be a legacy for everybody. And please don't forget about the schools. Like Washington School District has to be an integral part of any planning process. Thank you.
Hi, this is Tracy Dunlop, the Deputy City Manager of Operations. And I think I might take this question first. And I have three pieces I think I can address for you, especially that public safety piece, and then I'll call on others to help with other pieces. In terms of fire and police, officers per thousand is a very sort of simple metric that doesn't translate into how geography and the actual calls for service might be served. And so it's pretty common, I understand, to use that in the draft environmental impact statement. But in reality, the way service is provided is based on the geography and what resources are there currently. And an example of where we found that to be true was the annexation that occurred in 2011, that when we looked at it on an officers per thousand basis, it came out with a much different number than when we looked at it based on calls for service. So the primary answer to your question is, in terms of what the basis is of changing fire and police, is what we did is we estimated the calls for service that would be generated by for fire and police, and then looked at the capacity to serve those calls in and around the facilities that the station area would call upon. And for fire in particular, which is where there was the largest change from the firefighters per thousand, was because there's capacity to take additional calls at Fire Station 26 in Rose Hill for the early stages of this development. That the number of calls that are served by that station today, there's more capacity there. And once the capacity that currently exists is reached, that what we would do is add a position there, an aid car, and then upgrade to a ladder truck, which would help then serve the remaining calls for service in the latter part of the study period. And so it was similar but less dramatic for police, but it was based on a more detailed assessment of the capacity to serve in that area, which involved both public safety departments in that discussion. We totally agree that the school district needs to be involved in this, and we're in consistent, regular communication with the school district about what would be helpful in getting them at least options or techniques by which they could serve a more urbanized area. And they've been doing work as well to look at how they would serve in an area that is not only not suburban, but developing into a more urban area. And we are and will continue to talk about ways that the city can help them meet their obligations. I think Joel Funt, our transportation manager, is on, and he might be able to speak a little bit to your transportation question. Are you available, Joel?
Yeah, I'm available. So to the transportation connection, the transportation part of the question, we are looking at this holistically, and we will continue to do so, looking at how we create a transportation network that not only facilitates the traffic through this area, it needs to accommodate growth kind of throughout the community, and 85th Street in particular also serves communities to the east. So we have to look at it from that perspective. And then we're also looking at how we can create a more reimagine the transportation system in this area so that it can support the land use that we are envisioning here through a more complete network and a much more robust network of walking and biking facilities. And of course, we are also looking at how we're working with our partners at King County Metro and at Sound Transit to make sure that we're creating really easy, frequent, direct connections between local transit on Northeast 85th Street and other places in the, but mainly at the 85th and 405, and making sure that people can connect easily with the Northeast 85th Street station and the BRT, the bus rapid transit system, which will arrive in the 2026-2027 timeframe.
Great, thanks, Joel. So I'm just doing a time check. We're at about 7 o'clock here. We've got several people still with questions for us, and questions coming in via the chat too. So if we could try to keep the questions or comments to a couple minutes to try to allow to hear from as many people as possible, that'd be appreciated. And I just do want to make sure folks know that we are looking at all the questions in the chat. And if we don't get to it in the live session, we will be following up with a Q&A document after. So with that, we'll go to the next person with their hand raised, which is Larry Totally.
Thank you. Appreciate Joel's response to the last question, because mine ties into that same thing. So we're depending on Metro for east-west transit service, which the study shows bus rapid transit, additional bus lanes and such can't be cost effectively put in. So buses will basically end up in the same traffic. So how are we going to assure that Metro will increase bus service along 85th to provide this local service and connections? And two, who's going to pay for it? Is it going to be countywide? Is it got to be another vote by the people to tax ourselves countywide, and will it pass? We don't know that. And then the other question would be, how will development under alternative B actually mitigate its impact on Kirkland's transportation system outside of the station area? When it basically says the assumptions in the fiscal study is that all the impact fees, transportation impact fees generated within the station area would be used for improvements within the station area, even though the traffic goes way beyond the station area. That's a no-win situation for the rest of the city if that's indeed all the impact fees go back into this community, into this one station area. It's a lose-lose outside, it's a win-win inside. So I'd like to get some more response on that, please.
So I can start, thanks Larry for the question, and I can start with the first half, and then I may probably best to look to the folks who did the fiscal analysis to best describe the second question. But to your first question, there's in the short term, King County Metro is fully committed to the new Route 250, which they have identified as a frequent connection between downtown Redmond, downtown Kirkland, and downtown Bellevue. And they see that as an important route for them. And then also a key route between Woodinville, Totem Lake, and downtown Kirkland uses 124th and 85th. And we've been coordinating with King County Metro throughout this process. And they recognize that there are, challenges with this segment of the Northeast 85th Street corridor. And they are also very excited and looking forward to implementing the Rapid Ride K line, which is the next rapid ride route that King County Metro is committed to working on planning for. And that route uses 85th, and they see that as a route that will connect Totem Lake, the 85th Street Station, downtown Kirkland, and then on to downtown Bellevue. And the strategy that we have been working on with them, and it's the strategy that they're looking at as well, is although in the Northeast 85th Street corridor, we aren't looking at a lot of new transit priority treatments. We do get a lot of benefit from the new interchange, which will basically provide, dedicated transit lanes between 114th Avenue and 120th, which they see as a pretty significant benefit. And then since these routes, this is just a small portion of an overall route, what the city and King County Metro are working on together is how we can improve the speed and reliability of the overall route. So looking at additional treatments on 124th Avenue and Totem Lake with the widening project we have going on up there, transit queue jumps more in downtown, and efficiency treatments, at the transit center, and then also additional queue jumps on 108th in the Houghton area, as well as, continuing to look at things like transit signal priority and some of those types of treatments. So that's the approach that we're working on now. And then King County Metro will continue as they move forward with Rapid Ride, looking at additional improvements, throughout the route, including improvements in Bellevue.
Thanks, Joel. Maybe I'll just take a quick shot at answering the impact fee question. And I think the intent in the analysis was to kind of get a scale on both the cost side and the revenue side to see if it was dramatically out of balance. And so in the example in the question about assuming the impact fees generated in the area would be used in the area. It was really to size what the impacts might be and size the revenues that would be generated. In reality, two things would happen as the next 23 years take place. One is that as improvements are identified throughout the system, we'll be updating those transportation impact fees, and based on my experience, generally speaking, they do tend to increase, and we're only assuming they'll increase by inflation here because we don't know what all those improvements will be over that period. But the second is when we actually plan for capital improvements, we plan for them generally on a funding standpoint for a 6-year period, and we look at it system-wide. And so we wouldn't necessarily say that we had to set all of those impact fees aside for 10 years, which in fact probably wouldn't work from the legal standpoint until they're needed in the station area. If there's a project out that far, what we would do is we would invest them system-wide as we do on the current basis. And then as impact fees came in and as large projects were identified, we would prioritize those projects in the capital improvement program. And so I think one of the things that those of you who might go into detail in the fiscal analysis might notice is that we're assuming all the revenues and all the expenses are sort of in a closed system. But the question we were trying to answer is there enough revenue generated that we could see a strategy by which this could take place? And so it's not the way we would probably manage it on a year in, year out basis, because the other thing that I would just say as a general observation is we had to make some assumptions about what development happens when and of what scale. And what we'll need to do in reality is respond as it actually takes place and prioritize. But this was really trying to be prospective and make sure that the scale of the needs was not, dramatically higher than the scale of the resources that might be available.
Thanks, Tracy. Looks like the next hand we have raised to ask a question is Kathy, and I don't have a last name, but Kathy.
Hi, I'm Kathy Iverson, and I would like to ask a question based on our senior population. If I were going to take the bus from the rapid transit station and I was going to drive there, where am I going to park to access this, irregardless if there's no parking there? How is this going to work for seniors and those with questionable mobility?
Thank you, Joel.
You bet. Good question, Kathy. So when the Sound Transit and the city worked together to identify the Northeast 85th Street station as the location for the additional BRT station, the decision was made not to provide park and ride space. It was we can use that land in that area for kind of much more productive uses around people moving to and from the station and accessing it on a regular basis. But what we can do is we have a lot of different tools and a lot of different ways for folks to access the station. There is, the idea is that people can use existing local transit service and then transfer. The idea behind that is a little different than what people are typically used to with like a one-seat ride, but we are looking at the local transit and the regional transit being very close together in this case. It's basically a very short walk, and that service would be coming frequently. So the wait during that transfer would be very short. And because those trips are very direct, we're talking about travel times to get places that are pretty quick and reliable. But that's just one way people can access the station. There will continue to be, there is going to be a pickup and drop off circle that is being constructed as part of the station, so that there will be dial-a-ride type service that will be able to access that. People can be picked up and dropped off there by personal vehicle. Things like Uber and Lyft can use that. And then we continue to look at other options of how we can provide those, short trip connections as well, along with, and this isn't for everybody, of course, but walking and biking and those types of modes as well. So we're really looking at trying to provide a lot of different options for folks and designing a station so that it can work for a lot of different ways to access the station.
Thanks, Joel. I'm going to hop over and grab a question from the chat. And I just want to note that some folks have asked multiple great questions in the chat, and I'm just going to try to grab questions from as many different people as possible. So if you've asked multiple questions, I might just ask one. So the next question is, the large deficit under Alt A makes me think that the city isn't charging high enough fees so that development improvements don't cause fiscal insecurity to current residents. Why, when we're already meeting our GMA requirements, would the city be forced to permit a dramatic change in zoning to not face a budget mess?
Thank you for that question. And I think it's a good question that kind of relates to what I was talking about earlier in terms of how the city does its capital planning. In the current zoning that exists, the needs to serve the redevelopment as it occurs is something that we look at through our master plans and through our planning process, but it evolves over time, and how those projects are funded happens over time. And there are tools that we can use to make sure that development pays a fair share, and that is a very good point. Impact fees is one, connection fees is another, but there are definitely some rules around those fees that make it so that they can't pay for all projects in the area. And an example I'd give around transportation is that impact fees can pay for capacity, but they can't necessarily pay the full amount for services that serve a broader population than just the growth of the development. An example would be improvements in facilities for walking and biking, those kind of non-motorized facilities that would serve not only the new growth, but serve the existing population. And so you can't put the needs for the current population on the development. It only has to be those needs that are occasioned by the development itself. Similarly, with the utility systems, the capacity has been built over a long period of time, and there are projects that will need to be done to be able to accommodate any amount of growth, and that the incremental cost of those projects to accommodate more growth is actually relatively small. And the example I'd give is if you're replacing a water pipeline, a lot of the expense is in digging the trench and all of those elements of putting that pipe in. Putting in a larger size pipe doesn't add as much cost as just putting in a new pipe in and of itself. But what I'll close with on that is that one of the assumptions that we had to make to kind of simplify this 23-year look was that we assumed that connection charges and impact fees would only increase with inflation. And in reality, as our master plans identify what's needed to address transportation capacity and utility capacity, the amount of those charges is likely to go up, and that would help contribute more than what we're showing in this analysis. But that happens over a period of time. We update those every 3 years or thereabouts to recognize projects that we've identified that weren't in the fees previously. And so there's and I think Aaron said this a little bit earlier, it's not uncommon when you look out that far to have projects that you call unfunded at this point But one of the things that the city does through its processes is put together funding strategies as those projects are identified. And so recognizing the long-term plan of this, that we would be looking at making sure those fees are keeping pace with what they can legally be set at, and then we'll prioritize the projects based on the needs as the development occurs.
Thanks, Tracy. We're going to go to the next hand raised, and that is Bill Blanchard. Do we have you on the line, Bill? We're not hearing anything yet, Bill. Let's give you another second and then we might come back to you. Yeah, it seems like your audio isn't.
How about here?
Yep, we can hear you now. Thanks.
Wow, the love of Zoom. All right, as I was just saying, thank you for putting this on tonight. I really appreciate this. It's a very important issue facing the future of Kirkland. And I'm Bill Blanchard. I'm chair of the Kirkland Alliance of Neighborhoods, and I've been doing that since 2015. CAN has always worked with the city to help define the future of Kirkland. And Kirkland, of course, is a city of 13 neighborhoods from Houghton to Finn Hill, each with its own character and our own neighborhood plans that help residents have joy and certainty about the future. My question tonight is, how is the staff, consultants, and the council respecting the work that went into these neighborhood plans? Thank you.
Adam or Jeremy, I think that might be a good question for you. I see Adam.
Yeah, I can start it off, and if other folks want to join in, please do. I'm Adam Weinstein, the Director of Planning and Building, and yeah, that's a good question, Bill. There are existing policies actually in our current neighborhood plans, including the Rose Hill neighborhood plan, which was adopted a couple of years ago, and then also the Norkirk and Highlands neighborhood plans that support this planning effort and support connecting the neighborhoods around the station area to the actual station itself. So that's one point I would make about it. There are current policies in the neighborhood plans that support this planning effort. And then the other thing I would mention, which is sort of related to the neighborhood plans, are other policy documents that we have in the city. So the comprehensive plan overall, which calls for a lot of the same goals as the ones that we're seeking to achieve in the station area. So housing, diversity, more better park space, sustainability, et cetera. So those are in the comprehensive plan, which includes the neighborhood plans as well, and then also the sustainability master plan, which establishes lots of goals for sustainability that trickle down into the neighborhood plans as well. And we've talked about transit access, green building measures, other sustainability measures that would be met by the station area plan. So there's a lot of existing policy documents in the city that would support the station area.
Thanks, Adam. We'll go ahead and go to the next hand I see, which is Brian Granowitz.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I was wondering, so there's a little area of the Moss Bay neighborhood, which is in the southwest corner of this area, where our condominium complex, I'm on the board of the Kirkland Park Place condominiums, and initially the plan was to double the zoning heights for the residential areas, and to also take them from residential to mixed use. And I'm wondering, it's hard for me to read the draft environmental impact statement and understand what is currently seriously being considered for our area, because we were not for doubling our zoning heights or changing our zoning from multifamily to mixed use. So if there's an answer, sort of like what's happening, kind of a lot of people are focusing on what's east of 405, but we live west of 405 and south of 85th. And we're wondering what's now currently kind of the thinking direction that's being proposed for our area.
Thanks, Brian, for your question. I wanted to just, maybe it might help to share with you a map of the June, what we call June Alternative B that was studied, as well as June Alternative A that were studied in that fiscal impacts study. So I'm going to share my screen for a moment just to point to a few things to give you a tour of those maps. So on these maps, we have the interchange in the middle here of them, which I'm just highlighting in pink. On the left is the Alt A, and on the right is the Alt B, which Council has asked us to develop further. And so the places that are colored in on these maps are places where there's consideration of potential for change to zoning within the station area plan process. So south of 85th and west of 405, there's just a couple of areas that are being considered for potential zoning changes. They're, just close to 85th, as well as along 6th and along Kirkland Way, and closest to the interchange. So I hope that.
So the area, the corner on the corner of 85th and 6th is the, I don't know what we call it now. It used to be FileNet. There was somebody trade Tableau, and then now Google. Yeah, that building, and then there's the mustard yellow buildings across 4th Avenue from it. Yeah, I was wondering what's happened for being proposed for those, and then also for the ones that are to the east of the CKC.
Okay, so the ones, first let's take the ones along 6th, so the old Tableau building there, and going south along 6th. The blue color indicates potential for office or some kind of commercial or job use. So that's the sort of use that's being considered there, along with looking at the potential for some additional height. The mustard yellow color signifies sort of a flexible idea of what kind of development could occur there, which might include industrial, commercial, or residential use. And that's looking at sort of that linkage along and keeping that flexible in that area. That's kind of the gateway to downtown there.
And do you know what the height?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Actually,
let me grab that one moment. I need to, 1 second, I need to just pull another map. It'll just take a moment here. You know what? I apologize. I don't think that the height map is in the slide deck here. And so I just I don't want to misspeak on this or misquote. Tracy, you look like you're poised to say something.
My suggestion is, Allison, you can take down that question, and we can respond more specifically with the height information about those parcels.
Okay, that'd be great.
Thank you.
Something from me, or do you have?
No, I think
We'll note it in our list of questions that we're going to follow up on.
Okay.
So thanks for the question, and thanks for letting us make sure we get it right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next hand I see raised is Liz Hunt.
Left.
Can we can hear you now, Liz.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. My name's Liz Hunt, and I've been a Kirkland resident for a number of years. This is a really big plan. I have a number of questions and concerns, but I will, including some significant concerns about the finances. But I will just pick one item, and that is affordable housing. I've read thousands of pages of these materials, and I'm still struggling with how does this plan provide affordable housing. If we're now focusing on Alt B, that's geared to add, for example, 11,892 new jobs over this time frame. Most of a large percentage of those very high-paying tech jobs, 200,000 a year, whatever. Almost 12,000 jobs being added, and in that same time frame, only 5,370 residential units being added. In that big word art we saw at the beginning, housing was a big word in there, and I think there's just a significant need for housing at more affordable prices in our city. And it seems to me that adding these big expensive jobs or big high-paying jobs, which are wonderful things to have, is going to result in increased pressure on housing prices in this area as opposed to decreased. And I don't see how some commercial linkage and some of these other items being discussed are going to make any kind of a dent in affordable housing in our city. So I would love to hear more about that. Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Liz. I am just going to pull some information from the community benefits analysis, which was looking at this question of how it may be possible to maximize the opportunity for affordable housing as a key priority. Just a moment here. So a couple of things that the study analyzed. One was looking at what would be possible in terms of potential for value creation through future new development. And what that means is what might be the potential difference between the cost of purchasing a piece of land, developing a building of different types, and what rent might a developer get for that building. And so a portion of the study, which is called a residual land value analysis. And so a part of the study looked at the kinds of development that are being studied under these alternatives and how feasible the development is within the market, and what might be potential for additional value capture from that private development. What the study found is a couple of things. Sorry, it's a bit of a long answer. What the study found is a couple of things is that residential development that's being considered doesn't have a lot of additional value capture potential. So those residential developments wouldn't necessarily get a tremendous additional amount of rent that could be used to fund affordable housing. It did, however, find that commercial development does have good capacity for additional value. And that's one of the reasons that the team recommended the commercial linkage program, which links that the demand of those new jobs to affordable housing need and looks at allocating a fee on commercial development in order to help pay for new affordable housing. We did, through the study, try to get a sense of what might the possible range of value capture potential be. And I'm just going to pull that information. So what the study found is that there's a lot of factors, but if all of the allowed development capacity for commercial that was represented over that 23 years in June Alternative B was to be built out, that there may be possible to generate in the range of between $10 and $50 million that could be flow into that commercial linkage program. So that was just to help council get a sense of what scale of program might be possible as they consider that as an option. I mentioned the residential value capture potential and noted that there isn't a lot of it. But the one thing with new housing is that through the city's existing inclusionary zoning requirement for affordable housing, 10% of all new residential units that are built would be required to be at levels that are affordable. And so that's one other piece that we could anticipate with this plan, is that 10% of the anticipated new homes would be affordable through that existing policy.
Thanks, Erin. I'm gonna grab a quick question out of the chat. Sorry.
I was just going to say thank you. I know we already have a 10% allocation on affordable housing. That's already been there. That's not new. And then if we're generating $10 to $50 million over this 23-year time frame, I don't see that going very far in creating any affordable housing. So this is why I'm confused. So thank you.
Thanks for your comment, Liz.
You're welcome. Okay.
All right, I'm gonna grab a quick question out of the chat, and that was: has anyone questioned the value of the bus station? It concentrates traffic and causes traffic problems. Better to have multiple bus lines feeding the Bellevue light rail station. Is anybody thinking about this?
So I can answer this one a little bit. So the overall analysis that we've seen from working with the State Department of Transportation and Sound Transit on the overall design of the new interchange, traffic in the area should actually function a little bit better than it does today. Additionally, the station will not only provide better bus access, but it also provides for direct access lanes to the express toll lanes so that folks who want to access the HOV lanes and the express toll lanes using like a, pay to get in there as a single occupant vehicle will be able to do that without having to weave across all of the general purpose lanes as they do today. So there are, multiple benefits to having the station there. And then it also is, the best access we have to serve not only the station area, but downtown Kirkland. And one of the key reasons that we are focusing the transit service along this corridor is that we're trying to, link into the regional high capacity transit network, which is growing. In 2024, we'll have light rail extending north to Linwood and then to downtown Seattle and on to Federal Way, and then out east through Bellevue and out to Redmond. And the bus rapid transit system, which will be the same kind of thing, providing rapid, reliable, frequent transit trips, will link in with light rail in Linwood, and it'll link in with the 522 bus rapid transit in Bothell, and then it'll also connect directly to light rail in downtown Bellevue, and then also at Tukwila. So by focusing those services there, we can really provide those quick, reliable connections. And really, as an example, today, if you're riding a Sound Transit Regional Express bus, it typically takes about an hour to go from Linwood to downtown Bellevue. And once 405 Stride BRT North is in place, it's estimated that trip will be somewhere between 33 and 38 minutes. So that's a over 20-minute reduction in that travel time that will not only be faster, but more reliable. And we just can't meet those kinds of metrics when we're thinking about providing distributed local service. The other thing is we're looking at 10-minute headways during the peak and 15-minute headways during the off-peak. And as we spread transit service out further, those headways get longer and you're looking at, like a half hour between buses and stuff like that. So by focusing those service hours on specific corridors where we can also make significant capital investment, we get a better quality service that feels a lot more like light rail.
Thanks, Joel. We're going to go to the next person with their hand raised, and that is Robert Irichetta.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes, thanks, Robert.
Okay, yeah, so I'm going to be a little bit more of a realist here. So the reality is the city of Kirkland is asking North Rose Hill and South Rose Hill to carry the burden of this growth, correct? I should say, right? I mean, if we look at the area plan, all the high buildings, all the volume or the high density is going to be in North Rose Hill and South Rose Hill. So my question is, have we considered, because when you have this growth, there's going to be a drop in quality of life. You're going to have traffic, you're going to have probably higher crime rates. The answers of how we're going to alleviate some of the traffic is we're talking about these buses and these trains and all these different mass transit ways of traveling. But that's essentially saying that you want people in South and Rose Hill to travel via mass transit to be able to avoid the traffic. So you're telling us we can't use our vehicle. So it's the idea is that you're asking us to lose our quality of life as a sacrifice for the city of Kirkland to have growth. And that's just what it is. Have you thought about giving some level of benefits to both these neighborhoods? For example, it could either be property tax break, it could either be permit waivers. So if we need to build on our house to make it more to increase back the value of our house, because the value of our house will go down with the loss of quality of life. So that's as a person who lives in North Rose Hill, I believe we need to grow. I believe it's going to happen no matter what. But I think it's only fair that if we're going to do this and we're going to carry this burden, that there be a consideration for us that we're going to lose property value. It may still go up, but it won't go up the same value as it will if you're west of 405. And I want people to understand that, I understand West 405 is a special area, but the East 405 is where my kids were born, where they're raised, and it's a special area as well. So I want people to take that in consideration and really think about what can we do for these two neighborhoods that are going to carry this major burden that's going to bring all this employment and all this revenue to our city. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. I think I'll try to take a little bit of I guess I'll say mechanical answer to the question. I think that the reason to do sort of the community benefits analysis is to try to look for ways to address the quality of life impacts. And my pragmatic answer is, unfortunately, the property tax system probably wouldn't provide a mechanism to do what you're suggesting. But what we're looking at is trying to have the revenues that would be generated by that development invested in the community and the community access to quality of life amenities. And one of the topics that we talked about a lot in that study was making sure that parks were available and that park amenities were available. And one of the struggles we have citywide is right now our park level of service standard assumes that we have to buy acreage. And there have been times where there has been undeveloped acreage, but at this point, our ability to provide parks amenities, regardless of the station area plan zoning, is becoming constrained just by the urbanization of the area. And so I think what we're trying to do with the community benefits is to look for ways that we will be able to help the area absorb the growth that's going there and not see a decline in the quality of life. But I think the alternative is growth is going to go where the market is looking for it to go. And one of the things that we were interested in that result about alternative A is that without changing the zoning, the ability to maintain the quality of life would require significant investments, and that we'll need to focus on those investments even without that density. And so I think that the balance is that in this way, we can be a little bit more proactive about responding to growth if we look at it in the manner that the station area plan looks at it, because the growth may choose to go there and in a way that doesn't generate revenues to help offset some of those quality of life impacts. And so there's a balance there, but I think that it will be a concentration of growth in that area. It brings potentially some efficiencies, but I think we can acknowledge that what we're trying to do is figure out strategies to help address the quality of life impacts that you're speaking to. I don't know if anyone wants to add to that, or maybe in the interest of time, we'll move to the next question, but we appreciate that perspective.
Thanks, Tracy. Next hand raised is Matthew Golzer.
Hi, good evening. I wanted to speak to the fiscal impacts related to Lake Washington School District. It was my understanding during the special session on Tuesday that the fiscal impacts did not holistically look at the impacts to the school system with a statement that that would be something that would have to be addressed by the district in the future. My question is, when will the city of Kirkland engage with Lake Washington School District to assess the full fiscal impact of this project on taxpayers? As taxpayers, we're impacted by the full project costs, shifting them from the city to the school district doesn't make that go away, and it doesn't make that burden go away. If we're looking at 5,000 new residents, 10,000 new residents, 20,000 new residents, whatever the number ends up being, there will be clearly, and this impacts Alt A, Alt B, option 1, 2, 3. This has been an issue with this project discussion the entire time. What is the real plan for actually sitting down with the school board to deal with this, so we don't see a loss of service or a loss of quality in the school system? And again, simply kicking that to Lake Washington School District to have it be their problem to resolve doesn't seem like that's the fair and right thing to do on this. Thank you.
Appreciate that question. We are actively and have been actively engaged with Lake Washington School District, and what they have been doing is providing us with feedback on what can be incorporated into the station area plan to help them have alternatives that recognize the reality of them not having access to the kind of large parcels that they're used to in their whole service area. They have similar issues, I think, in some of the density that's happening in Redmond. And they've been very creative and forthcoming with the kinds of things that could be built into the station area plan to help them be able to respond to the increase. I believe the student increase numbers under alternative B is something on the order of 900, where it's a little less than 200 under alternative A, either one of which represent a challenge to the school district. And so they're looking at how we might be able to accommodate additional density or joint use facilities on their properties, how we might be able to require in some of the higher height development floor plates that could be used for more urban school uses. Again, we implement the school impact fees on behalf of Lake Washington School District, which is why we size those amounts that can be put toward there. But they are actively involved in looking at alternatives and bringing to us the things that should be considered in putting together the station area plan to help give them the options. The other thing we're both doing is very actively looking at properties that may be available to secure the property, because I do believe that is one of their biggest concerns in the entire service area, is that there's just not a lot of property available. And so we meet with them regularly, and they have provided us with input and feedback and things that could be built into the station area plan and the form-based code that would help them address the needs as growth occurs.
Tracy, thanks. And one other just quick thing I wanted to add on the topic of property availability is I know that an idea that the school district had raised was potential for rezoning their existing high school property in order to allow them for potential future redevelopment capacity. And so that was something that it sounded like there was some interest from council on considering that as we develop that June alternative B. Thanks for your overview, Tracy.
Great. I just want to note that it's a 7:45. I think some of our project team might be able to stay on the line a little after 8. We've got several more people with their hands raised and a lot of good questions coming in via the chat. So we're going to keep going a little past 8 for those that can stay on the line. We'll try to keep answering as many questions as we can. Just want to note again, keep typing your questions in the Q&A. We will be getting a frequently asked questions document together after tonight. So we'll keep pushing on with the next raised hand, and please feel free to keep typing questions into the Q&A box. The next raised hand I have on the list is Curtis Brown.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks, Curtis.
I'm Curtis Brown. I live north of the currently Johnson property, and I'm representing myself and the other families and homeowners on this street and our neighbors around us. Have a question here, but I just wanted to lead in that it continues to be extremely insulting to hear conversations saying this has focused on housing and affordable housing when your map literally says the Kirkland is intending to force us from our homes, that you're taking actions that will destroy our property values, destroy the quality of life for anyone around this area, trap us in our homes, and literally potentially bankrupt some people and cause other exits, especially when these homes are exactly the type of thing that they claim that we want. And it's duplexes and condos and the only affordable homes in the area. So I mean, I ask that, if it is actually about housing, then please have your actions match what your words are. And let's see the community benefits that we keep talking about be about existing Kirkland residents, not benefits of theoretical community once the existing residents of Rhodes Hill have been forced out. But actually the thing I want to ask about is saying that it's been stated that that all the recommendations around this 85th Street plan around aspects like modifying existing plans for offsets, green space, lot usage, residential offsets, that's not going to be done. That's still underway. It's not going to be done until later this year, next year, or sometime next year. And that we've seen, giant gaps on something like traffic, which all the city council just said, hey, that the plan is really lacking when it comes to how are people going to actually get down these streets? How are they going to get to the bus stops? And we've seen the planning commission expressly state that they don't want it to, reflect that the community said, we don't want massive buildings. We want a max to increase to 85 feet. Yet we're still seeing, despite those timelines, we're still seeing a rush to make decisions that seem to be specific to Google to allow them potentially up to 2 to 3 times higher than any other structures, along with other potential gifts that they're demanding that remove, basically they're demanding to remove all restrictions and let them do literally whatever they want with that property and to the neighbors. That includes 100% lot coverage, no offsets, no consideration to land rise, no green space. This is something that if any of these things are allowed before the finalized, it sets a precedent. The rest of the plans don't matter, as they can look to this particular property as saying, look, that's a business, that's in this area, they are a business, they are not Kirkland, they're not a residence. They want 7,000 additional people, and that is half a block. That's over, that's massive, I think 12% increase of all of Kirkland in a tiny area that we're already saying the transportation is not there. And they're also, while they're claiming, hey, we're going to use public transport, they're demanding that they use 118th now, a private residential road, is one of their primary entrances and a third entrance. If they're really about transportation, they don't need all these additional exits and roads. So there's been no justification presented as far as why they would be treated any differently than any other business. And what they're proposing is going to cause a massive hit. and this timeline is really about Google. They want Google's Kirkland to bend to their timeline. There's not a benefit to Kirkland. And they currently make fine with just 2 stories, and yet somehow they're claiming that they need a ton more or else. That's not a beneficial partnership. That's essentially a hostage taker and a hostage. So the question is the city council would the city council committing to act ethically? Is Kirkland's voters a city council, not the employees of a single $1 trillion corporation that bend to their timelines and unjustified and unprecedented demands, and not make any 85th Street planning area concessions beyond the current zoning prior to the studies and solution proposals being finalized in 2022? That's my question. So I know you're not the city council here, but I want to just state that that is mine and all our neighbors' questions. So if that's answered offline, that's fine. If someone can answer it live, that's good too.
So the city council isn't responding directly, but I see in this, it's more intended to be a Q&A, but I see City Manager Kurt Triplett is available. Do you want to speak to the comment? I think you're muted.
Thank you. So, I think having the opportunity to talk, in more detail following us or offline would also be helpful, because it's a pretty detailed question. But the short answer is that the issue is not as much Google's timeline as it also is the Lee Johnson ownership timeline, which is one of the things that made the council really look to this stationary plan in the first place, was the catalyzing effect that the stationary itself would have and the bus rapid transit would have. We have always known, and every city knows, that while car dealerships are very helpful from a revenue standpoint because of the sales tax, they're also not a very long-term sustainable use, and they eventually convert. People sell the surface property and it turns into something else. And so one of the big concerns here is, under current zoning, what the market will build there is luxury apartments. And so when you look at the entire stationary plan in total, and you look at all the amenities that the city council is hoping to achieve with this vision, things like affordable housing, help for schools, the innovative park programs, the sustainable development, all that, none of that happens if the commercial properties up front turn into apartment complexes. And that's just a quick summary of the overall, financial issue. So the issue is not to rush to get to Google itself. The issue is to see that those properties develop in a commercial way at the beginning of the 20-year plan, because the development of those properties in a commercial way, in a sustainable way that meets the vision, is the way that you get all of the other amenities that are necessary for both the capital infrastructure and the benefit infrastructure. So again, just a very nuanced question. I'd be happy to talk to anyone individually about it or in a group, but the purpose is to try to work to make something happen there that works the entire stationary over 20 years. And that means you want to have the right kind of development happen up front. Last thing I'd say on that is that land use planning and zoning is a real challenge. It's also a bet on the market. So we can use the example of the Kirkland Urban Project and the Village at Totem Lake project. We spent 25 years waiting for the Village at Totem Lake to convert. So when you create these plans, you also want to work with willing developers who are going to build a vision that you want. And I think that what we're seeing in the totality of what Google's talking about, it's the sorts of things that we want to build into our vision for the station area. So it's all of those things together. Again, happy to talk to it. It's a complicated topic, but I appreciate the concern. But the Google project itself didn't happen as a concept till the beginning of this year, and the stationary plan was launched in 2018 based on the 2016 Sound Transit ballot measure. So wanting to do something positive for that area happened long before Google started talking to Lee Johnson about buying the property.
Yes, but the extreme heights didn't happen until Google got involved. It was a good plan in 2019. So anyway, we'll send you an email, Kurt.
Sure, happy to meet.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and grab a question from the chat as we near the end of our scheduled time. And again, some of the panelists might be dropping off, but we're going to try to get in as many questions as we can, and we might go a little over here. The question is, what was the assumption of how the 117.7 million for infrastructure improvements would be constructed? Would they be constructed in large blocks to take advantage of scale and reduce period of neighborhood impact, or would they be constructed in smaller pieces over a long time period?
I think maybe I'll take a run at that. I think it builds a little bit on what I was talking about earlier about the capital planning, but particularly when we looked at the community benefits tools that are out there, the Washington State Legislature in this past legislative session authorized a tool for large-scale redevelopment that hasn't really been available in the state of Washington before, but is used in other states. It's called tax increment financing, and what it's intended to do is to address what the question is speaking to, which is, are there major investments that need to be made to essentially make redevelopment work? And is there a way to capture the increased tax revenue that would come from the redevelopment up front to help do those projects that will maximize sort of the community benefit, but also help not have the same level of disruption that one project at a time might bring. And so I think part of the follow-on work to proceed toward developing the station area plan is to evaluate of the projects that have been looked at, what would lend themselves best to that tax increment financing tool, and that would help accomplish some of those exact goals that you were describing in the question, which is to do some of the major projects early and upfront, and that would help with some efficiencies and also with making sure that we're taking care of those improvements that need to be done when the opportunity arises. And the station itself is an opportunity to do capital projects because they will be building the station there. And so some of the water and sewer projects actually take advantage of that in the way that you're describing. But that is one of the tools that will be studied further in the next iteration of the work, is how to put that to the best use it can be in the station area.
Thanks, Tracy. The next hand that was raised was from Phil Allen.
Hi.
Hi, Phil.
I have a bunch of like totally numerical questions in the chat. I'd be happy to get some answers, but I think they can certainly be handled offline. I did have a question that kind of matches an earlier question from one of the previous speakers. I live about a mile south of the 405 85th Street interchange. If I were Tiger Woods, I could definitely hit a golf ball to the Houghton Park and Ride. Now, if I've been listening, and I actually was already aware from the project documents that there'd be no general use parking kind of at the bus rapid transit station, but would there be a shuttle from someplace like the Park and Ride up to the BRT so that people in those neighborhoods at least can make use of the use that shuttle to be the last mile to get them to the fast, or the first mile and the last mile to get them to the rapid transit to get them everywhere in Puget Sound?
Thanks for the question, Phil. And I see Joel ready to answer.
Yeah, that's a good question. Currently, we do not have like specific plan to provide shuttles, nor does King County Metro or Sound Transit. There are projects that are included in the plan that would, for much of the area, decrease or include decrease the distance as the kind of crow fly, well, not as the crow flies, but actual new infrastructure connections to make walking or rolling an easier, more direct connection. And then what we are also talking to King County Metro about, and King County Metro is doing more of, is experimenting more as technology and companies come online that do these kinds of services through software, through specialized vehicles, to look at more on-demand shuttle services. We actually in Kirkland right now, in the Juanita and Finn Hill neighborhoods, are piloting a community ride service, which is an on-demand service that works a little like a Uber or a Lyft, but uses a small transit shuttle vehicle. And then then King County Metro has other services like that that they're looking at in other places. So those are things that we will continue to work with Sound Transit and Metro on, looking for opportunities. And you know, as this planning effort goes forward, continuing to look for ways to provide as much access to that station that doesn't involve, you know, driving a single occupant vehicle to the station.
Cool.
Thanks, Joel.
Thank you much.
You bet.
All right, the next hand that was raised was from Brad Beckman.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Yeah, so I've lived in the Rose Hill area for about 15 years. I'm actually currently a park steward for Rose Hill Meadows Park, which is, I think, the biggest park in the highlighted area. I also live currently in the highlighted area. And my question is regarding the mid-block pathways. So at least as I understood it from the last picture you showed, that there is no plans for new mid-block pedestrian ways on the southeast side of the development area. I believe prior proposals included such pathways, but and I apologize if I missed them this time around. But you know, I think it may be important, especially for elementary age kids who would want to walk from like the new high density areas to Rose Hill Elementary, which I think is the closest elementary in the area. You know, the amount of traffic, especially auto traffic on 85th Street, is not really conducive to walking you know, younger age children. And I know there's existing pathways between 122nd Street and 124th, as well as 124th and 126 via Rose Hill Meadows Park, but there's no existing pathways between 120th and 122nd, as well as 126 to 128. Is that just, you know, was I just reading too much into your current pictures, or is that actually not part of the plan? Because I do think it's really important. I mean, I'm personally very excited with the overall project, as being someone who lives in the area. I do understand other people's concerns with not, but you know, for me, it seems like these pedestrian pathways are actually a critical part of making this station conducive to really walkability.
Hi, Brad. This is Erin. Thanks so much for your question. So the maps that were shown earlier that illustrated the June alternatives that were studied in this fiscal impacts and community benefit study, I want to clarify that you're right. Those didn't have those green connections drawn on them. However, that is definitely an important part of the overall plan framework, and green connections. And it's just because those maps were focused on the levels and type of growth that were being studied in the sort of assumptions for those. But I do want you and everyone to know that we as a team believe those green connections are really important. They were originally suggested in particular in thinking about ways where there may be potential, especially in large parcels, to provide some connections for people to walk through them. They may have opportunity to also serve a stormwater function or other requirements. And then finally, I did want to let you know as well, as a team, we are looking at ways to create safe and pleasant connections, particularly between schools, to schools and to parks. So that's something that we are certainly looking at as we develop the plan direction moving forward.
Thanks.
Thanks, Erin. The next hand raised was Ken McKenzie. think the audio is a little distorted, Ken. Can we? Yeah, maybe give it another try, Ken. Still not able to understand what's coming through. In the interest of time, Ken, maybe we'll go to the next hand and come back to you. But yeah, the audio was distorted. So we're gonna hop to Lori and then I'll come back to you, Ken. And Lori, if you could unmute yourself.
Okay, there we go. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Lori.
Thank you for letting me speak. I appreciate the thoughtfulness, all the work that's going into this. It's obvious there are a lot of people very concerned. This is a plan for a severe increase in population density over this time period. So we're encouraging the housing, we're encouraging the businesses. We plan for the new residents and that travel to Kirkland to support those businesses, but I want to speak to the impact of current residents. I currently live in the Highlands, in the affected area. I've been here since '99. I've lived in Kirkland all of my life, which is many more decades than that, except for about 10 years in DC, and I'll come back to that. So people bring their cars, they love their cars. The behaviors that we want are not the behaviors that we necessarily are going to get. Even Ms. Dunlop spoke to that earlier when she said that what we want for the development won't necessarily be what we get for the development. So walking from downtown to BRT is a huge hill. Most residents don't currently walk it. They're not going to walk it. We have no park and ride planned. Also the Highlands and the surrounding areas, which is where the BRT access is going to happen, will have to withstand those additional cars and as people use the local residential areas. I also heard Ms. Dunlop say the quality of life is going to be impacted. There's really nothing we can do about that. I get it, but we can try to mitigate and try to work at this. Having lived in DC, I've seen those parking issues around high population density areas where there is a transit entrance and it becomes, residential areas become metered pay parking. So I understand we're not DC, but we could be headed that way with no parking available because people will use their cars. If you build it, they will come. So I heard Joel speak to connectors, Lyft, Uber, that also represents more cars. We need more study on how we're going to mitigate that obvious parking issue. Current suggestions do not appear sufficient. So I'm requesting that and asking if there's anything else you can add today. That's my first question. The second question is 85th Street is challenging to traverse right now. It brings a massive additional traffic to the corridor. It does not have space for major renovations. Speak more specifically, please, to how we're going to address that beyond the additional bus routes, which people aren't riding them now. We assume people are going to ride these things. They will just be competing with tremendous additional traffic from cars. People don't take the bus to Costco. I think we're severely underestimating the impact of traffic in the cars, and that's not sufficiently addressed. So if there's anything else to be said on that, that would be great. And Joel, if I heard you correctly, light rail is never coming to Kirkland. There's nothing in the plan for that. So the two questions, please, if you happen to catch them, I can repeat them if I need to.
So with the first question, when it comes to, I think what your question was, Lori, is specific to Northeast 85th Street. So certainly that is a very important corridor for, it not only provides access to, this area, but also downtown Kirkland and areas to the east and Redmond and beyond. And so we do have, transportation modeling tools that we use to forecast all of that growth together so that we can make sure we're planning for that. And so we are looking at, targeted vehicle, capacity improvements on the 85th Street corridor near the interchange, and how best to do that in a way where we can add additional vehicle capacity while continuing to provide the access for the other travel modes and the people, because it's not only about moving cars, but it's actually about the city of Kirkland's focused on trying to move people safely and efficiently, and so balancing that. But there are some targeted widening proposed in the area around the 120th Avenue Northeast and Northeast 85th Street station. And then also some capacity improvements on the 124th Avenue Northeast corridor, just around the intersection with Northeast 85th Street as well. And those are really the two main areas that provide additional capacity outside of the interchange project that Sound Transit is funding and WashDOT is building, that will actually create a more safer, more comfortable way to walk and bike through that interchange and access transit, but actually will make it work better for people who choose to drive through the interchange as well. So that's the approach that we're taking to the Northeast 85th Street corridor. And then your second question, I've now forgotten. But
so I think it was, I don't think you intended to infer that there would be light rail in Kirkland.
Oh, yes.
I think it was more of the connection with the light rail system.
Right. And so, yeah, there is no current plans in the ST3 to bring light rail to Kirkland. The bus rapid transit along the 405 corridor is our connection into the high capacity transit system. Included in ST3 in the outer years of the 30-year plan is another study of high capacity transit north-south in the 405 corridor that would link Bellevue, Kirkland, Bothell, Woodinville. But that is just that is simply a study at looking at the possibility of future investments in the 405 North corridor, or in some sort of other adjacent corridor in preparation for some ST4 ballot measure, which there's no plan to do or even talk of doing right now. But those are the two major Sound Transit projects.
Joel, the other question was actually around the BRT access point and the residents who live in that area, and the fact that we put some high density housing there and we put BRT access there with no parking. And all of the residences here are everyone's going to be parking along the streets because people will drive.
Yes. And so that's something that we have a commitment from Sound Transit to continue to monitor and work on, is and it is an element of the plan, is looking at how best to manage parking in the area so that it does provide access. It does not become, the public streets don't become so overcrowded with commuters that there is not space for visitors and deliveries and those types of things. Any public parking, any parking on a street they're public streets. So, the public can park there, but we don't want to get into a situation where people in those neighborhoods can't go about their business and, like I said, have visitors or deliveries or those types of, or, people who are, helping them with other things access their homes.
Thank you. I just want to throw in also that Highlands is going to be impacted just like Rose Hill will be, because there is a commercial area below Highlands that is on Plan B. I think it's Plan B is highlighted in orange and will be rezoned. I'm certain it'll be rezoned. So that will affect views and access. So Rose Hill guys, we got your back too. We're feeling the same pain in the Highlands. There will be development. I understand it's not as severe, but it impacts our area as well.
Thank you for your questions and your comments, Lori. We're gonna move on just to try to grab probably 1 to 2 more questions. We're gonna end the questions at 8:20 so we can wrap up. And thanks to all of you who have stayed on the line with us a little longer. So Ken, we're gonna go back to you and see if we can hear you this time.
Okay, is this better?
It is, yes. Thanks, Ken.
Okay, yes, sorry, Mike died. So 3-part question, please. The first is, I think Tracy stated it pretty well, and a lot of people have talked about how this project will damage the quality of life in Kirkland, where quality of life is defined as what we have today, kind of across the board. And I think everybody has their own issues that will be more or less impacted. The city does not have a GMA shortfall. We're growing much faster than we have to by the Growth Management Act. So the first question is, why is the city overgrowing? Why grow more than we really have to? Why not manage the city growth to be what's required and preserve as much quality of life as we have it today as possible, even as we grow? We all know we have to grow. The second is that Liz Hunt brought up an interesting issue about the dichotomy between affordable housing and tech jobs. And basically, there's talk about having really expensive tech jobs, expensive in the sense of the salary paid to the workers, and using money from that development to fund affordable housing. Well, okay, so the guys making the guys and women making $200K per year are not going to be living in affordable housing. And the people living in affordable housing are not going to have the $200K per year jobs. So that means there is no live work neighborhood. We have people that are going to be commuting in and out of the neighborhood for work, and people commuting in and out of the neighborhood for their job, for their housing. We're not building a live, work, walkable neighborhood. We're building 2 distinct styles of life that will cross as one goes in the neighborhood every morning and one goes out. And then the third is that this is in fact deeply unpopular. I did a detailed analysis of the draft EIS comments, and 19.6% of the respondents were in favor or had positive comments in their letters for the SAP. 9.8% were neutral and 70.6% were against the station area plan, as documented in last January's EIS. Of the people that were against it, 86% were against alternative 2. If they mentioned a specific alternative, 86% said, I don't like alternative 2. And 89% said, I don't like alternative 3. So we have like 2 to 1 against this thing. And of those, nobody likes alternative 2 or 3, which means alternative 2 is not a compromise. Of the people that were against the station area plan, 72% commented against building height, and 50% expressed concerns about traffic congestion. And yet, with that analysis of the only written public comment that we have, the city council has been consistently told that there were lots of positive comments about the plan and that people were in favor. Every meeting where the station area plan has been presented to the city council. The city council has been told positive things, yet the data indicates that the community is against the plan as they know it. So my question on this one is, why hasn't the city council been told what the data says rather than anecdotes and incredibly high-level summaries that seem to point in a different direction than what the public has in fact actually said? Thank you.
So maybe I could just take a quick shot at that. So Ken, I think this is another one where I might want to follow up with you and your group to talk in more detail about that. There's a lot in what you said that we probably can't address in the last few minutes. So I would just say this, that all of the comments that have been provided, the council has received. So they have all of the detailed comments, they have summaries of the comments. All this is currently on the website. So, and we will certainly pass on your comments and your concerns that you expressed today, but there's a lot more to be said. I'll be happy to meet with you and talk more about it.
Thanks, Kurt. And that actually takes us right to 8:20. So we're going to try to wrap up and let you all continue on with your evenings. Thank you so much to those of you that have taken the time to listen in. Thank you to those who have raised their hands and asked us questions and given comment. Thank you to the many people that have added questions to the Q&A. As I mentioned before, we are going to take a look at that Q&A and create a frequently asked questions document that we'll be publishing. We got a lot of good questions, so give us at least a few days, but we'll be working hard on that to get you answers. For those of you, I did see a couple comments that asked for the slides. These slides were all also slides that were presented to council at their October 26th study session. Those are available on the project webpage. If anyone has questions about how to find that, I'm happy to follow up. And before we ended tonight, I did just want to show our next steps for the plan. And if you can see my screen, so we just ended that October 26th council study session. We are going back to speak with council about the project on at the November 16th study session. Those meeting materials will be posted on the webpage when they're published. And we'll also be talking to City Council on December 14th. So on November 16th, we'll be giving council an update on where we are based on their direction to start drafting a preferred plan direction. And on December 14th, our plan is to take that preferred plan direction draft to council for their review. We are anticipating that we'll issue the final supplemental environmental impact statement by the end of this year. And then in 2022, we're going to start working on the actual final station area plan, the form-based code, any comprehensive plan amendments, and a planned action ordinance. And that'll be done with a lot of that work will be done with our planning commission. And those planning commission meetings and city council meetings are, of course, meetings that we hope the public attends. And with that, I'll stop sharing my screen. And I would just like to thank everyone for their time tonight. Thank you to the panelists for being available. And thank you so much to the community members who joined us.